Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time, and I'm here for another Monday this and that video. And if you're new to my channel, what these are just a weekly vlog that I do to keep you updated on various experiments that are going on, to talk about some things that I could lead you back to older videos I already have out, or to tell you about some new experiments I'm trying that are doing really well, and that I can just keep you more updated to current things, such as things like the garden and stuff. So I know several have been looking forward to this particular one, because one of the many topics I'm going to go over today is how to make your own cheese powder through dehydration, not freeze drying. Now again, for those who've been following me for a while, please understand, if you have a freeze dryer or really want a freeze dryer, I am not trying to negate that or talk bad about that. What I'm trying to do is do some different experiments so those people who cannot afford a freeze dryer can realize there are many things you can do with a dehydrator that do not require a freeze dryer. Yes, some things you're going to get better results with a freeze dryer, but not necessarily. Some things come out pretty much the same, or at least close enough to that we can make a dehydrator work for us, whether it be an electric dehydrator or just doing it the old-fashioned way, the way people have been doing it for thousands of years. So let's talk about this cheese powder. So you can see right here, I've got my little jar of cheese powder. This was done two different ways. This was done both in my electric dehydrator, my new one, the Kasori, and also in a method using absolutely no electricity at all. So yes, it can be done. So I'm going to talk about these. Now this is just regular mild cheddar cheese that I had in the freezer. So the nice thing about pre-freezing the cheese means you do not have to grate it. The thing to make it best for the cheese is to have it either grated or crumbled small. So one thing about, especially with cheddar cheese, if you freeze it first, it'll just crumble right up. So watch what happens when I cut it. There's some cheeses that will actually cut into a nice slice without falling apart on you. This particular one just goes right to crumbling. Then you just go like this, and you can crumble it up as small as you need to. So that's what makes pre-freezing cheese really nice. You can avoid having to grate, because one thing I do still hate doing to this day is grating cheese. It's one of my most despised chores in the kitchen. So I always use frozen cheese and then crumble it up. And then once you have your cheese all ready to go, what I found the very best thing to do was I just went right to this method. I did not use a silicone tray. I used those cloth covers I made for my Kasori. I did put on the lowest tray in the dehydrator, since it was my first time trying the cheese, down on the very bottom a silicone sheet, so that just in case it decided to drip any fat as it was dehydrating, there would be something down there to catch it and not collect at the bottom of my dehydrator. But that was really unnecessary, because the whole purpose of doing the cloth in the first place was so that as the cheese was dehydrating and the oil would start coming out of the cheese, it would be absorbed by the cloth, and it worked perfectly. Being that it's a cotton cloth is going to allow plenty of airflow and help it to dry quicker. And since I didn't want to actually melt the cheese, I just wanted to dry the cheese, just like I did with the eggs and the milk. I set the dehydrator at 100, I actually set it at 116, 1 whole degree higher than the milk and the eggs. And I thought about going to 120, but again, I was trying to avoid melting the cheese. And I found it worked perfectly, and it took about the same amount of time for the cheese to dry as it did for the eggs and the milk. In 12 hours, it was done. The cheese was all dry. And then what I did was I used my special coffee grinder that's not at all used for coffee. It's used for everything else. I have separate coffee grinders for coffee, and I just processed it in that. Now, one thing I did find about the cheese is it does not powder up quite as finely as I can powder up the milk or the eggs, but it still can have some uses that I'll talk about here in a minute. Now, let me talk first about the off-grid method I use. So I did the same idea with a stainless steel tray, put the cloth over it, and then put another cloth over the top of that cheese, and then put it in the rack that Patrick built. Initially, I was going to try it on top of the wood stove. but it was just a little too hot and the cheese was starting to melt. And I didn't want that to happen, especially since it was laying on fabric. It was going to adhere to the fabric. So then I went ahead and moved it down next to the wood stove, and that worked really good. But the difference was it took 24 hours, so twice as long to dry it that way. But as long as you're not in a hurry, what does it matter? It was a completely off-grid way for me to do it that didn't require any electricity or any dependence on an electric machine that's going to break down someday at some point, where I always will have that off-grid dehydrator that Patrick built. Now, he does have a video out on how he made it, and that's quite a few years old. And then I also did a video on the other uses for it that I'll link to both of those down below if you're interested. But you can come up with all kinds of different ways to make your own dehydrator. But I do suggest going with as much stainless steel as you can and metal. That way you can have more uses for it, such as using it on top of the wood stove like I do when I'm making jerky and drying certain other heavier type things. So now let's talk about the way I've used it. I've only used the powder a few different ways so far. The very first thing I tried was sprinkling it on buttered popcorn because I thought that would be really good. Now, while it was good, there were two drawbacks to it. One is because I used a mild cheddar, whenever you're talking about, and this is going to apply to any of the other things I'm going to talk about, when you're using a mild cheddar, anytime you go to cook it, bake with it, or anything, you just don't get the flavor you do if you're using a sharp cheddar. Now, if I'm just snacking on cheese, I like a very mild cheese. But when you're cooking with cheese in any form, whether it be macaroni and cheese or making a cheese sauce, it's always better to go with a sharper cheese because the flavor mellows out whenever you cook with it. So a sharper cheese is going to be best. So I'm going to order up a brick of sharp cheese and try this again. But the other issue with the popcorn, even with the popcorn buttered first, because it's still pretty coarse when I ground it up, and I did try using it put in the blender too, and still didn't get it as fine as I hoped I would. But because it was so coarse, it just did not want to stick to the popcorn. However, when I tried it on butter noodles, that worked really good. It stuck to the noodles just fine because the noodles are pretty starchy anyway, and that was really tasty. But again, you still had a very, very mild flavor there when you did that. And then the other thing I did, and this was the best yet, was I just did a little sample in a little tiny pot. I made a little bit of cheese sauce with it. Now so I just simply added water, a little salt, and some flour so it would thicken up well. And it made a really good cheese sauce. And I can see that being something I would use for making macaroni and cheese, and you can make it really, really smooth. I only used a fork to mix it up, and it was just a little bit lumpy in there, but not bad. But if you use something like a stick blender or anything else that you could whip it up a little bit better, that might give you an even smoother texture, but it was actually fine just the way it was. So definitely, if nothing else, it is great for a cheese sauce, but I have yet to try it in anything else. If I do down the road, I'm first going to get some sharp cheddar and powder that and dry that up first before I do any more. And then I'll do some more experiments with that because I think even, like I said, even just sprinkling it dry on noodles is pretty good. It's pretty tasty. But having that sharp cheddar will give it definitely more flavor. So you can do that without having to invest in an expensive freeze dryer unless you really want to. There's nothing wrong with that. If you have the money and you really want to and you love freeze-dried food, then I recommend going ahead and going that route. A lot of people love it. Not everyone though, and again, not everyone can afford it. Okay, let's move on and talk about a few gardening related things. So our garden, like for most of us, is finishing up. We still got a few things coming in. You can see I have this big bowl here full of tomatoes that I brought in from yesterday and today. So what I've been doing is just bringing in the tomatoes before it freezes and letting them just ripen in here. I've done so many different methods. You can do the wrapping in paper and putting it away in a dark place, and that does work, but I found it didn't really make any more difference than just setting them out like this and then keeping an eye on them. That way you can see them all the time and remember them, and then as you see them getting ripe, like this one is right here, you can either eat it right away or stick it in the fridge or dehydrate it up or use it in a sauce. But I found even some of the greenest tomatoes will eventually ripen. Not all of them. Some of them will rot first, but most of them, even if they're very green, will still ripen up and you can use them. Yes, I know there's many ways to use green tomatoes. There's fried green tomatoes. There's green tomato relish. I've made that before and it's excellent. I even have a recipe video out that's a few years old I'll link to down below. You can even cut them up and use them in dishes where you have other vegetables, be it a stir fry or soup. Those can work pretty good. You can make green tomato pickles. I've done that before. Just fermented green tomatoes is what it was. Okay, a couple other garden related things. So I did, if you remember, I decided to try some of the lemon habaneros and I got a total of 4. 2 I brought in, 1 I cut up just so I could taste it. I have never tried a habanero. I have some habanero hot sauce. That's one of my favorites, but I've never tried a fresh habanero. And I was actually surprised it wasn't near as hot as I expected. Maybe it's this particular variety, but anyway, I wanted to try it just for fun. And even though I only got 4 peppers, the other 2 are still out there, very green, and I don't know if they'll ever ripen up. My plan was, when it comes to anything like this, like I'm trying, just like with the little mini bell sweet peppers, I got a few of those. What I'm doing is saving the seeds from those, and I'll try them again next year because I did like them. But what my hope is, the same thing with these, is once I save the seeds and try them again next year, I expect to get a better harvest because now they're more acclimated to our area. Now, I still love my Chinese 5-color peppers. They're just my favorite because they do well. They're so colorful and pretty, and I just like them. They're little, and I didn't find this to be any more hot than those. So I think I'll still try the lemon habanero next year again, just to see how well it does. Just a plant or 2. And see how well it germinates, see if I can get more peppers off of the plant when I grow them from seed that I saved from this year. And then the other thing I tried this year were the black nebula carrots. And I just didn't know what to expect. I'd never actually heard of them before. I came across them when I was looking for some other seeds on Etsy and decided, hey, I'm going to try those. And I really didn't expect them to do good because purple carrots here just usually don't do great. They did actually a lot better than any purple carrot I've grown before. What I'm doing is leaving all the smaller ones in the carrot box that I grew them in, and I'm just going to let them die back and then put out some seed for me next year and then see how well those do from those seeds. So it'll be a couple years before I see how that does. But I like the carrots. They're very vibrant color, very deep, and I know that if I was to cook them in anything, they would turn everything I cooked that color, so I wouldn't be something I would add to a soup. Like I'd never add beets to a soup. It would be something I would eat more on the side or ferment. Now, because of the deep dark color, you know, just like with beets, it's going to be very high in antioxidants and very good at helping to detoxify the system. I would say fermenting them would be really great. I love fermented carrots, especially if they're mixed with cabbage and onions and garlic, things like that. And right now I'm just eating them raw. They do turn your tongue purple though, and your fingers too. It'll stain your fingers as well. So anyway, I'm going to be trying those. It was kind of a fun experiment, just like with the habaneros and the little mini sweet peppers. And then one more garden related thing would be that I still got calendula blooming. This is one of the things I love about calendula. In fact, I have more calendula blooming now than I did midsummer. It's great. I have so much coming in. Most of it since I already dehydrated up quite a bit, most of it I've been saving up for seed, but every so often I'll go pick some flowers and use them for other things. So right now what I have here is cold infusion of calendula flowers with a little squeeze of lime from an organic lime, just for a good healthy detoxifying drink. Sometimes, usually in wintertime, I really like hot teas more than anything, but for some reason lately I've been craving more colder drinks like this, and getting some good infusions and plenty of good healthy water is good for you anyway. Now, I thought about this when I did a video that's going to be publishing in a week or so on herbs and more for digestive health, and calendula, though I didn't mention it in the video. Sometimes after I shoot a video I find even more information, so that's the great thing about those kind of videos where I'm doing a list, is I actually do a written list too that I link too, and I can keep going in there and adding more as I find more information. So a lot of times a video can just be a jumping off point, and then you can go to the list and copy and paste it into your own document. But anyway, calendula is one of those that's very good for digestive health as well, and many other things. I also have a video just on calendula and its many uses. It's one of those I use in my homemade skin cream that I use on my face and pretty much anywhere else every day. I love it. And calendula is great because it's such a mild flavor. It goes well with anything. I've even added the petals to homemade tortillas, and I've fermented it before, made a calendula kimchi before. That was really good. And I've also added it to stir fries. You can do so much with calendula flowers. They're so healthy for you. And one more thing I want to bring up before I close out this video, and that is let's talking a little bit about having backup supplies of various kinds. I'm going to be shooting a video just on that, but we have tons of videos already out there on that. But sometimes it's good to do a refresher on these and just kind of generally speak about that. But I want to bring this up because I had someone contact me recently and saying that nobody is talking about water storage. Well, actually there's quite a few people that do talk about water storage, and we have at least 2 or 3 different videos out there about water storage and what we do. I'll link to the most recent one down below. But along with that, about 3 years ago, Patrick and I did a series that ended up being 11 parts. We thought it might only have 3, 4, 5 parts, 11 parts, and we still had a part we never did get back to adding. And it was how and why we prepare. And each video in that series covered certain things, like one just about food, one just about water, one just about cooking and heat sources, one about medical supplies, and so on. And I'll link to the series down below, but just keep in mind, again, that's a few years old, and we have since kind of added more things to that. And if I was to reshoot all those videos, there would be more that I would put into those videos. So this video I plan on shooting today, I'm just going to do a general overview on that. And I'll also link down below to the more recent video I did on backup cooking sources, where I went into depth just on that alone. But there's all these different things you really should think about it if you're into preparedness and you're wanting to be prepared for whatever may happen and is happening, or things that you've seen happen in the past, because bad things happen all the time at the most unexpected times, and that's why we do what we do. And I know many people can come in and share how being prepared has helped them all throughout their lives in various different situations, whether it be a job loss or a power outage, which happens here all the time, water shortages, either because the city water that you're using became contaminated, or there's a drought going on, or a myriad of other things. You could even have a main break in your own neighborhood where they had to shut the water off for the whole area. So if you're on city water, you got to think of some backup things, whether it be collecting rainwater or putting in a well or whatever it is, or just storing up lots of water. And anyway, I recommend you go check out that video I'll be putting down below about our setup, and the one on cook sources, and then that whole series I'll be putting down there, and then be watching for that general overview I'll be doing that will come out in a few weeks from now. And any other thoughts or suggestions about the cheese powder or anything I talked about in here, or whatever you just feel like bringing up because you think it would be a good point, go ahead and put those down below in comments so everyone can read what you have to say as well, because we should all be learning from each other. It shouldn't just be me up here blabbing, because we all have something that we can offer. All right, well, thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.